So I'm here right now. This is where I'm going to be taking my USMLE exam. I'm finally going to do it. I've been preparing for this for so long. I'm going to give it all I got. Of course I want to do well. Of course I want to get a good score. But regardless what I get, I'm going to leave it all to God. So wish me the best. I'll see you all on the other side. Hey ubba-bubba, welcome to JuanMD. My name's Juan, I'm an MD, and on JuanMD I talk all about living life as a doctor and making the most of my Juan life to live. Well, actually, this is the second time I'm recording this video. I already spent like 4 hours recording it on the first try. But then when I listened to the video and tried editing it, I sounded so robotic. I guess it's because I haven't made a video in such a long time. Nonetheless, this is a celebration video because, as you might have seen in the intro screen, I took my USMLE Step 1 last September. I got my score on October 6th, and I'm happy to report that I got exactly the score I wanted. I passed, and I'm just so thankful. It was all so fulfilling. You know, all of that hard work, all of that studying. I've studied for 9 months straight, and I've been dreaming about this moment ever since 2015. I'm making this video because I'm going to share with you how I prepared for the USMLE Step 1. I'm going to share with you the resources I used, and it's going to be much more strategic, much more organized than how I studied for PLE video. You can see that video here. Why? Because after doing PLE, I learned more about myself, I learned more about my study style, and I was able to plan it out much better than I did for the PLE. Before I continue, I just need to share that I'm not affiliated with any of the resources that I'll be sharing in this video. They didn't hire me, they didn't ask me to do any of this, to share. I'm just giving my own personal opinion from my own experience. I will be sharing a promo code, but other than that, I won't get any other benefit from any of the other stuff in this video. Also, this is all based on my personal experience, so take it at your own risk. Of course, you know yourself best, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, so you know what resources work better for you. And then finally, I don't know if I have to say this still, but none of this is medical advice. If you want medical advice, you better seek consult from your own personal physician. With that out of the way, here are 5 plus 1 JUANconventional things that I did to study for the USMLE Step 1. I'm going to be using in this video a table that I developed. It's called the SWARE table. The SWARE table stands for strengths, weaknesses, experiences, action, and resolution. Strengths and weaknesses refer to the pros and the cons of using a particular resource. The experiences are how I felt while I was using that resource. Action and resolution is the outcome of using that resource and what I did in response to that. That's a little table that I made, and I'll be using it to describe each of the resources that I feature in this video. Okay, let's get right to it. The very first resource that I'm going to be referring to is FUPAS. FUPAS is the acronym I use to refer to the gold standard of resources that people typically use for studying for the USMLE. Conventionally, people refer to it through another acronym. I just don't like how it sounds, so I rearranged it and made it FUPAS. That stands for First Aid, UWorld, Pathoma, Anki, and Sketchy. And this is typically how it works. You're going to first study Pathoma, and you'll use Pathoma to annotate First Aid. It's like a set of videos, and they teach about, what's his name? Satar. Dr. Satar teaches about like basic pathology concept, and you're going to annotate that into the book USMLE First Aid. After doing that, you're going to answer UWorld. That's a question bank consisting of 3,500 questions, and you're going to answer that twice over. Some people recommend doing it by subject the first time and then randomly the second time. Other people recommend doing it randomly all the way, but you're going to do 2 passes of that. That's 40 question blocks. Blocks are like quizzes consisting of 40 questions. After each block, you're going to study it, you're going to review it, and all of the points from that review, you're going to also annotate into first aid. All your annotations you will use to make flashcards in Anki, or you can download pre-made Anki decks, and then you're going to make time to do flashcards to study high-yield memory resources. And then finally, closer to your exam, you're going to be doing Sketchy. Sketchy is a set of videos. It's like a picture mnemonic thing, and they use pictures, symbols to remind you of key concepts in microbiology, pharmacology, and pathology. And if you do all of this correctly, supposedly you're going to be ready for USMLE Step 1. And I didn't use FUPAS the way that people say that you should use it. Especially for USMLE First Aid, I knew that it wouldn't work for me. I like understanding stuff more than memorizing it, and because First Aid has a lot of tables, has a lot of outlines, the tendency with first aid is you memorize rather than understand. I want to be able to connect everything together, and so from the get-go, I decided that I would not use first aid at all. Before I continue, I'm going to be referring to the swear table to explain more. So FUPAS is the gold standard. Why? Because ever since the beginning of time, med students have been using FUPAS to review for the USMLE Step 1. And because a lot of med students use it, supposedly it's very helpful, very effective. And FUPAS is very comprehensive. It covers a great deal of data. Most every topic that you're going to experience in the USMLE Step 1, it's going to be covered by FUPAS. And because it's so comprehensive, it should get you a rough idea of your weaknesses. When you take UWorld question banks, for example, at the end of each block, it's going to give you a breakdown of which subjects, it's going to give you a breakdown of which systems that you're most having difficulty with. And since FUPAS is pre-planned, because all the med students who took it before you already have an idea of how to use it, pretty much dictated. And so less effort on planning. Now to the weaknesses, FUPAS as a whole is very expensive. I didn't get all of FUPAS. I invested largely in UWorld. Anki was free, so I didn't really worry too much about that. I had first aid, got the book in 2017, but I didn't get the 2021 edition, and after PLE, I didn't really bother getting the 2021 edition. I find that although UWorld gives you a breakdown of strengths and weaknesses per block, overall I find it more difficult to keep track of my weaknesses. See, you can only see it 40 items at a time. UWorld has a search function, and through that search function you can find keywords in questions. However, you're limited to a search result of only 40 items. You can make question blocks by subject, you can make question blocks by system, but again, you're limited to 40 questions at a time, and so I find it very difficult to segregate your strengths and your weaknesses, and I find it difficult to use for planning. So for me, UWorld is more of for study than for planning. And then next, since it's the gold standard meaning all med students or most every med student uses this, I find it very cookie cutter, meaning it's like a one-size-fits-all solution, when we know that from medicine there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. Every patient is different, and every patient will have different needs, different circumstances, and therefore you have to take all those into consideration before giving them treatment, before giving them management. The same thing with FUPAS. Every med student is different, and everyone has different needs, different circumstances. Not everyone can afford the $1,000 FUPAS. Every student will need something different, unique to their own experience, and that's why I call FUPAS very cookie cutter. And then finally, FUPAS is prone to survivor bias. FUPAS more so because it's touted as the gold standard, and a lot of med students use it, but most of the time the people who do recommend FUPAS are the people for whom it worked out. There are people who use FUPAS, you should remember this, and it did not work out. They failed step 1 even if they thought they were getting good scores on NBMEs, like 230s, but it didn't really work for them. And so it's something to consider that maybe you have your own needs, your own unique needs, and FUPAS might not work for you. So you should consider that before dedicating yourself. Okay, I'm gonna do FUPAS. Although, I mean, any resource that I will recommend in this video is prone to survivor bias, but from my personal experience with FUPAS, like I said, it was very weighty on memorization. And I had difficulty understanding some concepts when I was just doing UWorld QBank, especially during the first pass. I was having difficulty understanding some concept, and I did it the first few question blocks. It was randomized, but then I started another resource later on, and I used UWorld along with that other resource being Boards and Beyond, and I did it by subject, but even then I was having difficulty understanding concepts. My friend described it with a sandcastle metaphor, meaning like if it was a kid on a beach trying to make a sandcastle, he'd pour sand into his bucket and he'd carry it to the spot where he'd make the sandcastle, but there was actually a hole in the bucket, and so by the time he brought the bucket there, none of the sand was there anymore, so he couldn't actually make the sandcastle efficiently. And although I think it's better described as a hole in the bucket metaphor, although it seemed like I was getting it while I was studying it, as I reviewed the block, when I proceeded to a next block, another subject, another system, I would forget everything that I previously studied, and so, the sand falling out of the bucket. And because of the way that UWorld works, I had difficulty zeroing in on what my weaknesses were. I used mostly UWorld and Anki in my review. I definitely did not use First Aid at all. Pathoma and Sketchy, some people get away with just other videos on YouTube that are similar to Pathoma and Sketchy that kind of offer the same thing. There are some free video lecturers on YouTube who kind of explain topics very well, and you can do a YouTube search and just make sure that it's accurate, just make sure that it's up to date, and I think that'll work. However, from my FUPAS experience, what I did for FUPAS was very, very risky, and it was a big risk on my part, and I ended up using a lot of resources, which is also kind of risky because the tendency is you use a lot of resources, you end up losing focus, and you end up getting very confused, and that's kind of what happened to me, but I don't regret using so many resources because I actually was able to balance my study. As with any study resource, you need to assess your progress with NBME, USA, and Free 120. NBME is made by the same group that does USMLE. This is the Clinical Based on Science Self-Assessment, and it is a 200-item test that assesses your strengths and weaknesses, stratifies it, and tells you, hey, you need to improve on this subject. USA is made by UWorld. It's also by UWorld, and it's kind of like NBME, except it only has 160 questions. And Free 120 is also made by the USMLE people, except it only has 120 questions, and it doesn't stratify your strengths and weaknesses. It only shows you what you got correct and what you didn't get correct. But it's good to do these assessments after you finish any resource. After finishing UWorld Question Bank, 5,000 questions, so that's around 1.5 passes, I still wasn't doing well in NBME, and so because of that, I realized that I needed additional resources to reinforce the basics. And so that takes me to my next resource, which is Boards and Beyond. Boards and Beyond, or BNB, is a question bank / video bank that organizes everything by system. It's a mishmash of UWorld, First Aid, and Pathoma, and it gives you a foundational understanding of concept. He explains the general concept. The name of the guy is Jason Ryan, and he lectures all of the videos in the Boards and Beyond question bank. He gives you a foundational understanding of basic concepts in USMLE Step 1, and I think it's very helpful that the same guy is lecturing every video because it's very consistent. You have other video banks that kind of offer the same thing, video lectures, but the lecturers are different per video, and that for me makes it very confusing. Boards and Beyond for me is less confusing because it's the same guy lecturing each video, and because of that the thought process is the same, it's consistent, and I have to do less mental gymnastics while watching the Boards and Beyond videos. And after each video there are questions that you can use as a quiz, so you can answer these after each video to test your learnings, do some active recall, and you can also create blocks from the questions in the Boards and Beyond question bank, so that you can supplement your UWorld question bank, and I think that's very helpful. For the weaknesses of Boards and Beyond, this is for me too broad. Although it covers the basic concepts, the general ideas very well, it doesn't go very much into detail, and because of that there are some high yield information that they can mention in passing that's very easy to miss if you don't have a good attention span. Like videos, and their videos, they take time to watch, and if you miss something, you rewind, it takes up more time. The videos I think have a collective 130 hours to watch, more or less, and more so if you have to rewind each time. It's hard to keep track of the time, and it's so easy to miss details if you have a short attention span. My personal experience, I took 10 weeks to watch all of the BNB videos. It helped me with understanding some subjects like gastrointestinal and pulmonary physiology. I had difficulty still after finishing Boards and Beyond. I had difficulty with cardiology. What actually happened, I did all of the Boards and Beyond videos in conjunction with UWorld. So, for example, I was watching the pulmonary videos in BNB. I was also doing respiratory and critical care questions in UWorld at the same time. And then after I finished watching these Boards and Beyond videos, I still continued doing my UWorld question banks on random. Every now and then, if I came back to a topic that I had difficulty with, I would review. And Boards and Beyond videos, I think, are good for reviewing stuff if you kind of forget the idea. After doing BNB, I also did NBMEs, and I still wasn't improving that much. Although I didn't improve that much, and so I needed other resources to reinforce my learning. Before I continue, I'm going to share with you a referral code for Boards and Beyond for BNB. If you are a first-time subscriber for BNB, you can input JD underscore 63YY GVTFN5. I'll flash that on the screen and also put it in the video description. Essentially what happens is you input this and you get a discount on your first time Boards and Beyond purchase. I'll also get a bonus on Boards and Beyond resources if you use my referral code. You don't have to. I mean, there are other referral codes on the internet that you can use, and if you get a BNB subscription, you can also make your own referral code and use this to refer other people. But if you avail of this referral code, it'll help me very much with my future studies, and so I'll really appreciate it. Now with that out of the way, let's go to the next thing I did, which was US clinical experience. People don't generally recommend doing US clinical experience, or USCE, while studying for the USMLE Step 1. However, the thing is, I already had my mind set that I would be doing my USMLE Step 1 in May, I'd be doing my Step 2 in July, and I'd be doing USC in August, and so I kind of planned everything far ahead of time. And then when I realized that I could not take the USMLE in May, it was already too late. I already registered for USCE and I couldn't do a refund. I'll talk more about that in the swear table. I think though USCE was a benefit for me in the long run because it was a very good break from studying. Like when you study for too much, too long, it can be very draining. And going to clinics, actually seeing patients for a while, it gave me a breath of fresh air and it allowed me to actually apply what I was learning. And if you're not a US citizen, if you're an IMG like me, doing USCE gives you a good glance of the USA medical system and it allows you to see whether you really want it. And for me, I really loved how the system worked. Of course, all USKIs aren't the same. I guess I was just blessed that I had a really good USKI. Um, the people were very nice. The staff was very nice. They made sure that we had food, that we had coffee. They made sure that we had the essentials, right? They were very helpful when I had problems with the equipment, with the EMR. And the EMR, I got familiarized with the EMR. Back in the Philippines, you don't typically rely on the EMR 100%. You still have a lot of paper notes, written notes, and that makes it very difficult, especially when the resident, the attending physician, the intern, and the nurse all have to access a patient's notes at the same time. It slows things down, especially if you have to write things down in handwriting, which can sometimes make it difficult to read for other people. In an EMR or an electronic medical record system, everything is typewritten. Everyone can access it as long as you're part of the staff, and it smoothens the entire process, the entire workflow, which makes taking care of patients a bit faster, in my opinion. Um, and then the attending physician with whom I worked, he was very kind. He was very nice and patient. He has good rapport with his patients, and he would often commend me for tiny details, even in front of patients. And I found that um, very different from what I was used to. And my co-rotators, they were all just amazing people. They all come from different backgrounds. Most of them were IMGs too, like I am. They're all in the process of applying for residency right now. They were still so supportive of me when I took my USMLE exam. We're still keeping in touch after our rotation, and we're all, planning to support each other in the long run, which I think is very nice. And ultimately, I think USKI for me was a blessing. USKI for me was a motivation for me to study well for my USMLE Step 1. Now, for the weaknesses, it's very expensive. If I thought FUPAS was expensive at $1,000, this was expensive at $1,500. The thing is, it's hard to back out because once you pay a 50% down payment, you can't get the refund. And so I thought, you might as well push through with it since you already scheduled this. So I ended up postponing my USMLE to September after my USE. USKI can also take time from studying. I did study. I did have 2 week. I did have 2 days per week of break on which I would do UWorld question blocks. But other than that, it's not realistic. It's very naive even for me to think that you'll be able to do clinic and do 2 blocks even on clinic days. It's something to consider for yourself. And it can also be very exhausting, taking care of so many patients. You can't be assured that you'll go home on time. Our official time was 8 to 5, but sometimes we'd end up going at 7 because we need to finish patient data record stuff in the EMR. And so because of that, you'll need extra discipline to maintain it. But you're a doctor, I guess, and it's a good histological slice of what it's like to be a resident. And I think it's also very good training for when you go and do the actual thing. You're an actual resident who's getting an actual salary. I think it's something that everyone should do before applying for residency in the US. I really enjoyed it, especially taking care of patients. I really enjoyed meeting other IMGs of different walks of life, and I was able to familiarize myself with how an EMR system works. It affirmed my dreams of doing residency here. Although it wasn't a pedia rotation, I really wanted to be able to do a pedia rotation. It just so happened that at the time, I couldn't find a pedia rotation that had available slots. So I still plan to do additional pedia rotations in the future. I'm going to look for those opportunities. So for my accident resolution, I ended up doing 2 blocks of UWorld on the days that I wasn't rotating. I did not push through because originally I wanted to do 2 months. 2 months straight of USKI. But because I realized how heavy it was, I decided not to go for a second month, which I think was a good thing because it would have been in the month of September and I wouldn't have been able to catch up with studying for the USMLE. Um, After USKI, like I said, I stayed in touch with fellow rotators and they cheered for me as I did step one. I'm cheering for them as they do their residency match. So next up is art. My personal philosophy for studying is that studying works best if you enjoy what you're doing, if you're having fun while studying. It always baffled me when I was in college that I'd always read books cover to cover. I'd do night shifts. I do all-nighters, and I'd go to all the classes, and yet my grades weren't as high as I would have wanted them to be. However, I would observe that there was these people, for example, I like Pokemon, but there are these people who are so into Pokemon, and they can memorize all 400 plus of them at the time. Or there are these people who can memorize all the homunculi, all the characteristics of the homunculi in Full Metal Alchemist. And you wonder, why are these people able to do this? And yet, something as important as Staphylococci, people still struggle to memorize their characteristics. Then it dawned on me that the companies that make these franchises make it fun. They do it in a way that is fun. And so I realized that if I'm going to study better, if I'm going to study more efficiently, it's going to take more effort. But if I do it in a way that it's fun for me, I'm going to remember it better. And I noticed that because, for example, back when I was in first year medical school, I wrote a comic about vasodilation. And whenever I think of vasodilation, I think of that comic. And it's still stuck with me, how calcium is released from the endoplasmic reticulum, how arginine is converted into nitric oxide via calmodulin, and the entire process. I can still remember how it works, all because of a comic that I wrote. And so I've been doing art to study ever since. Doing art helps because it helps you memorize things in a way that's very unique to you. You make the associations in your head, you make the connections, you say, okay, this symbol, I associate that symbol with that disease or with that symptom, and it's more personal. I think it's a personalized way of studying, and if you can personalize your study, it's going to be much better for you. And it's also a very good break from conventional study, and so I highly recommend doing art in your study. And it's free. You don't, have to pay so much money just to do art. You can do it with a sketch pad and a pencil or two, or you can do it on your computer, and you can make it yours. You can own your studying. For the weaknesses, art is very time consuming, like because you have to absorb the information, and then you have to process the information in your mind, and then you have to regurgitate it, and you have to chew it again and regurgitate it until you get something extra special. Sometimes doing art can also be very disappointing because you're pressed for time, and because you're pressed for time, you're pressured to do things in rapid succession. So the compromise would be to stick with drafts. And I ended up with so many drafts in a folder on my desktop, and I haven't perfected those drafts yet, which is kind of disappointing for me because I would have wanted to polish all of it. But at the same time, I was pressed for time, so I had no time to do it. I intend to polish it in the future, but I had to prioritize covering the content that I could cover for my USMLE Step 1 exam. And because it's the symbols that you understand, that you associate, not everyone else is going to get it. Not everyone else is. It's like a joke. You tell a joke and you think it's funny, but when you tell it to people, they're like, eh? That's the standard reaction I get most of the time with my jokes. And so, it's kind of like that. Not everyone is going to understand it. And so you just have to accept it. And sometimes you will make artworks that people will get, but most of the time they won't. From my personal experiences, this was very effective for memorizing genetic concepts, for syndromes, for drugs, toxins. However, I didn't get to polish a lot of my artworks, like I said. However, the tendency was if I drew it, then I knew it. Then I would remember it better. When I was answering a question, I'd remember a drawing, and then I'd say, oh, this gopher reminds me of Gaucher disease, because I drew a gopher sitting on crumpled paper. In the future, I intend to polish the rest of my drafts, and I want to explore other creative, fun ways of studying, such as mind mapping, mind palace, gamification. For non-memory topics, if I had to study concepts, I would be fine not doing art for those, sticking with mainstream ways of studying, such as lecture videos and reading, I guess because it was easier for me to absorb. However, art's not enough, and hence I needed other things to help me understand important concepts, and so I still needed to refer to other resources. And so that takes us to number 4, which is Crush, the USMLE Step 1. I bought the Crush book because my uncle, he loves podcasts. And one day he was browsing podcasts and he saw, oh, Juan, you're studying for the USMLE, right? Well, I saw this podcast called Crush USMLE Step 1. And you might want to consider it. And so I thought about it. And one night, because I was having difficulty in cardio, I listened to the Crush podcast, particularly the part about heart sounds. And ever since I listened to that, I had a much better time answering questions about heart sounds. And so, because of that experience, I actually bought this book. The podcast actually is a narration of a book, Crush USMLE Step 1. And so I bought that book, and I used that to study for my Step 1. I love Crush because it's kind of like an amalgamation of First Aid and UWorld. I remember when studying for the PLE, for the physician licensure exam, one book that really helped me was BRS Biochemistry. I bought the book secondhand, and I really loved it because it explained things in paragraphs, but in a way that was so concise, but the main idea was there. And because of that, I had less difficulty doing biochemistry in the actual PLE exam. Actually, while I was studying for the PLE, I tended to do better in biochemistry than in other subjects. And so what I liked about Crush, it's kind of the amalgamation of UWorld and First Aid. It's UWorld, it's like UWorld because it will summarize concepts into paragraphs. Paragraphs that you can read, kind of make sense of it, you can actually absorb it better, but it's like First Aid because it organizes it into system and subject. And so it's more organized, easier to absorb, easier to organize in your mind. For me, things are easier to absorb if they're taken in a more organized manner. And in addition, Crush also has questions at the end of each chapter. These are essay type questions, which are nice because you don't have the crush. You don't have the crutch of choices, answers with choices. You have to answer it essay creatively, and as with art, when you answer things creatively, you kind of flex your association muscles, and that's what I appreciated about the essay questions in Crush. Crush comes with a podcast and an ebook, which I think is another strength. The ebook is nice because you can access it wherever you go through a cell phone app called Inkling. And the podcast is nice because, do you ever remember having those read-along books where the book comes with a CD or a cassette tape? 90s kids, raise your hand if you're a 90s kid. And you can read along while you're listening to the cassette tape. I love those books. And I think listening to the podcast while reading the book kind of gave me that same feel. Now, for the weaknesses, it's a book, and so it costs money. Typically, it costs around $50. However, I bought mine at Amazon secondhand at a discount, and actually, even it was secondhand, the quality wasn't bad. Even if it was secondhand and I bought it at a discount, so that was nice. Can't assure that for everyone else who buys it secondhand, but it's something to consider. And so, since it's a book, it also takes time to read. I bought this relatively closer to my actual exam date, so I wasn't able to finish it, sadly. The ebook, the problem is the interface of Inkling isn't really that good. Why? Whenever you open it up, it always takes you to the start of the chapter rather than continuing where you left off, and that makes it frustrating because you have to search. Okay, where did I leave off um, each time, and that kind of discouraged me from reading the whole thing. Now, like I said, Crush also has a podcast, and some of the podcast episodes are really good. That being said, some podcast episodes are really boring. It's like the person reading it just came from assisting in a liver transplant procedure, and that's how it turned out. It was like, this is how this part of the body works, blah, 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 and you feel like sleeping while listening to it. And so for those podcast episodes, I just ended up reading the book without listening to the podcast. Now, for my experiences with Crush, I think it helped me understand concepts much, much better, especially cardiology and embryology. As I progressed, there was much less highlighting as I progressed because, as time goes on, you just want to continue reading rather than focusing on highlighting. Okay, I want to highlight the important terms. People don't encourage highlighting anymore with studying because it's still, in a way, a form of passive learning, and you want to get as close to active learning as you can. And so I did away with the highlighting. I ultimately did not get to finish it cover to cover, although I intend to continue reading it in the future. And in addition to Crush, USMLE Step 1, there's another podcast made by the same author of Crush, the same authors of Crush, called Inside the Boards, which is a really helpful podcast for training your mind to think in a way that you can actually tackle the USMLE Step 1 questions. I really recommend it. The links for all of these are in the description. And as with any other resource, when you're done using Crush, you have to assess your comprehension objectively using mock exams like NBME. And again, although my NBME was improving, I still needed to target specific weaknesses. And that takes me to my last resource, which is Amboss. It was almost 1 month before my USMLE Step 1, and I was still having difficulty. I was still not doing very well in NBME. And so my friend, who was also studying for the USMLE Step 1, recommended this resource to me. And, I was desperate because I only had one left. I couldn't postpone my exam anymore without paying another $1,000, which is terribly expensive. And so rather than pay that price, I decided to get Amboss. And Amboss did not disappoint. Amboss is a question bank, like UWorld, has around 2,000 to 3,000 questions. But it also has an information bank that you can access at any time. And I like how the information bank stratifies the questions. It also has several add-ins that you can use, for example, with Anki. And it also has a feature that you can answer items, and then as soon as you answer the item wrong, it gives you an explanation of why you got it wrong. As soon as you got it right, it gives you an explanation of why you got the answer right. And I think this actually helps because it's kind of, in a way, conditioning, in a sense. It's a positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement because, like, when you get something right, it tells you right away, and your mind kind of, associates that right answer with the positive feeling of, hey, I got it right. And so that's one thing I like about Amboss. Huge feature of Amboss that I really like is the ability to create a study plan. You can tell it, okay, I want to study for this long. I want to do a maximum of this many questions per day. And I want to allocate these days as rest days. I allocate Sunday as my rest day. And it automatically says, okay, because you gave it these options, because you selected these options, we're going to make you answer 117 questions per day for 4 weeks. And so I'm like, but it was it came in handy for actually setting a goal, setting a daily target, setting a daily learning objective. And after each day, it'll give you feedback of, hey, okay, you're weak in this topic, you're weak in this um, section, and you'd benefit most from reading about this topic, you'd benefit most about reading this system, this subject. One other strength of Amboss is that it has multi-level questions, which really test your understanding. Kind of like UWorld, Amboss uses the term hammers to indicate like how difficult a question is. Like a one hammer question is really easy. A five hammer question is like, okay, what planet did this come from? Um, but it actually tests your clinical reasoning, and I think more than knowing stuff, it's really important to understand like why the answer is this answer, why a doctor would think this is the treatment or this is the diagnosis. And I think Amboss does a good job at testing that. And unlike UWorld, I think Amboss stratifies um, your progress into systems and subjects better, like which system, which subject you're worst or you're best in, and which subject you have to study more. I think Amboss does a good job at that. For the weaknesses of Amboss, the interface can be a bit complicated, a bit intimidating. Like I said, Amboss has an Anki feature, Amboss has a dictionary feature. If you open it up for the first time using Amboss, it can be a bit overwhelming, and you're gonna need friends to help you out in using Amboss, friends who have used Amboss before. I guess that's one thing that I think that's one thing that discourages people from using Amboss. Not that many people use it yet, not like UWorld. Um, Amboss also has a different format for USMLE. I mean, when you make a quiz in Amboss, you can change the settings to make it look more like the USMLE, the NBME interface, but the standard format of Amboss looks nothing like USMLE. And some people have told me like maybe you shouldn't use Amboss immediately before Step, and I would have done that had I been given that advice early on before I even started my Step study. People usually recommend do Amboss first, then UWorld second, but I ended up doing UWorld first and then Amboss second. Um, However, like when it came to the actual USMLE Step 1, uh, the interface, the format didn't really bother me. I had an easy time transitioning from the Amboss format to the USMLE Step 1 format. Of course, it's not going to be the same for everyone. You might be one of those people who, has a difficulty adjusting, so something to consider. Also, the five hammer questions can be a bit over the top. It can get to the point that, the five hammer questions more than test your understanding. It's more of an exercise in mental gymnastics. And, that's not really necessary, I feel, sometimes when you're studying for the Step 1. A three or even a four hammer question is fine, I think, in assessing your understanding. It can be also a bit discouraging when you answer the entire question bank and you have a lesser percentage than you got in UWorld, although in my case, I think it was because of the five hammer questions. That's how it was in my case. And I think it was because of the preponderance of the five hammer questions that was the case. Also, Amboss has summary tables in its study materials, and you can actually choose to summarize its paragraphs into an outline. When you do that, it tends to have the same weakness that first aid would have, and so I tended not to do that while studying Amboss. Only while reviewing, but other than that, I wouldn't really care about reading the tables. Personally, I found that it was great for testing reasoning and for testing the way you approach questions more than just your knowledge. Like I said, overall my QBank performance was lower than UWorld, which I, blame on the five hammer questions. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. However, I don't really regret taking this after UWorld. I think before doing Amboss, I tended to make a lot of careless mistakes, and by exercising my question taking, my question reasoning, my thought process, I was able to target, that carelessness, that tendency to be careless. And Amboss, I think, did a good job at doing that. So I ended up doing one single pass through the entire Amboss QBank. I didn't go through a second pass, although if there were topics that I was still having difficulty in after doing Amboss, I would do quizzes that, selected only items from that topic, and I skipped all the 5 hammer questions during the review. Like I said, it's too much mental gymnastics. I didn't need that. Based on their feedback, I would review Boards and Beyond and crush the USMLE Step 1. After doing Amboss, I did mock exams. Like I would say for any other resource, after doing Amboss, you should do more self-assessments, more mock tests. In my case, I did another USA because I had already done an USA before doing Amboss. I did USA again, and I did Free 120 again after doing Amboss. Now, how did I ultimately do? Around 70 days before doing my actual exam, I did USA 2, and I got a USMLE equivalent in the 180s. I did Amboss, and then 5 days before I took my actual exam, I took USA 2 again. The second time I took USA 2, I got 217. Now, some people will say, maybe it's because you memorized questions, and perhaps it's because of that, but I think that 60 days is good enough time for you to kind of forget the questions that you took the first time. And so because I got a 217 on my second USA 2, I decided that I was finally ready to take step 1, and I was not disappointed. For me, I think the entire study experience is worth it. Now, before I finish, I want to share with you the word of the day, which is Romans 8 verse 28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. And this was one verse that I found really important, that really encouraged me to push through with step 1. I am a Christian. That's core to who I am before I'm a doctor. I want to encourage you to give this a listen because I think it's a great way to look at life in itself. The context of this, Paul was going through so much struggling, so much suffering in life, but he knew that all of it was for a purpose. He knew it was for a much greater purpose than himself. See, the whole time I was doing my USMLE study, I wasn't doing very well in my NBMEs, and there were people who were actually telling me to consider to postponing it to next year. When I wanted to give up, I would just think of this and it would encourage me to push through. It's easy to forget that none of us are perfect. There are still so many things I don't know. There's still so many things I'm learning. All the good things that I have was authored by Christ. My salvation was authored by him, and I'm just riding the wave. And I believe that no matter what happens, he's going to make a way for me to do what he calls me to do. Now, sometimes like what God wants you to do is like totally different from what you want to do. And when you're not in touch with him, when you don't ask the Holy Spirit to tell you what you should do, then you can be blinded by your own plans, what only you want to do in life. And there's no certainty that things will happen the way you want it. You can do FUPAS, you can read all of the books in the world, but there's no certainty that you're going to get the score that you want. And so because of that, I was ready to accept failure. Esther in the Bible, she does something really risky, a threat to her life even, but she says that if she perishes, she perishes. But she had faith that it was for a greater reason than herself. At the same time, when I took that exam, I was ready to accept failure because I knew that whatever came from that would be for a greater reason than myself. During the actual test, I prayed during breaks. When the exam was done, I surrendered to his will for the outcome of the exam. Whether I passed or I failed, I pray that his will be done in my life. And accepting that relieves a lot of pressure from exam day. I actually finished an hour ahead of time. My friends were very surprised that I finished an hour ahead of time. Um, I entered it. I entered that exam room. I felt at peace. I left that exam room. I felt at peace. Although, times would come that I would worry about the score outcome. But, I'd always calm down because I remembered this verse. And it relieves a lot of pressure to remember what this verse means. And, I have no regrets from this entire experience. I developed myself, my study style, and I developed strategies that I could use for future exams. Made good friends, and I cherish old friends. And I was able to make the most of the experience. And because of that, I think this entire experience was a blessing. And, if I were to go back, I don't think I'd do things any differently. That was today's video. Please like this video. Please consider subscribing. Click on the bell for future updates. Stay tuned for my next video. I still have no idea what I'm going to do. I haven't made videos in such a long time, and so I still have to, brainstorm, to come up with new ideas. Thanks to everyone who has supported me through this entire journey. It means so much. I guess we can all stay tuned for more exciting things in the future. Until next time, guys, this has been Juan. Always remember to live life to the fullest because you only have one life to live.